In just 27 seconds, Jasmine Crockett turned a polished First Lady into a trembling shadow on live national TV, under the blinding lights of Congress. She dropped evidence that tied Melania Trump to an illicit past and a name America swore it would never hear again: Jeffrey Epstein. The chamber froze, cameras zoomed in, and the world watched a public image unravel in real time. What truth could be so explosive that it made the most untouchable woman in Washington crumble before millions? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. It hit like a siren in the night. Bold black letters splashed across the nation's screens. Morality showdown. First Lady to face Crockett in live congressional hearing. Cable news anchors spoke with the urgency of a missile launch. CNN called it a battle for the White House's soul. Fox framed it as a radical Democrat ambushing America's First Lady. And MSNBC simply asked, who will survive Thursday? By the time the morning sun rose over Capitol Hill, the country was already picking sides, and Jasmine Crockett hadn't even opened the envelope that would drag her into the fight. The envelope was heavy congressional seal stamped in gold, edges crisp like it had been cut with a scalpel. She sat at her desk, staring at it as if it might explode. Her chief of staff, Darren, hovered in the doorway, voice low but edged with panic. "You realize this isn't an invite, it's a loaded trap." He tossed the Washington Post across her desk. The headline screamed, "First Lady to defend White House image against left-wing firebrand." In the corner, two aides whispered like conspirators, one scrolling through a stream of tweets that alternated between "Crockett's our truth teller" and "she's just chasing clout." Jasmine's name was everywhere, but not all the light felt warm. She held the envelope in her hand and thought about the people who never get invites to rooms like that, black mothers whose children's stories never make the evening news, immigrant families erased from policy drafts, women told they're too loud, too emotional, too much. This wasn't about her comfort. This was about piercing a White House that hid its sins under silk curtains. And yet, she knew Melania wasn't coming in unarmed. The First Lady was a masterclass in public illusion, perfect posture, disarming accent, and a skill for smiling while twisting the knife. Darren stepped closer. "If you walk into that chamber, they'll strip you down to the bone. Your record, your family, your past, everything's fair game." Jasmine didn't blink. "Then they better be ready for what I'm bringing." Outside her window, the winter light poured over the Capitol dome, sharp and cold, like a stage light waiting for its actors. The hearing was locked in for Thursday prime time, every major network on standby, the banner already designed: public morality and trust in the White House. Within hours, political blogs whispered that the hearing wasn't about morality, all it was payback for Jasmine's recent committee fireworks. Others claimed Melania herself had demanded the face-off, furious at being painted as the silent, ornamental First Lady. Jasmine's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous tip, another name, another half-buried rumor about Palm Beach nights and photographs that were never meant to see daylight. She couldn't tell which leads were poison and which were gold, but she knew one thing. Tomorrow, she would walk into that chamber carrying truth sharp enough to draw blood. The only question was, when the blade came down, would it cut her or her opponent? By noon, the story had mutated into a media wildfire. CNN plastered a split screen, Jasmine Crockett on one side, Melania Trump on the other. The chyron reading: Morality Showdown, Congresswoman vs. First Lady. Fox News, and for the jugular, branding it radical Democrat targets America's First Lady. MSNBC framed it as a David and Goliath battle over the soul of the White House. Every network had talking heads dissecting body language from photos of the two women, predicting strategies as if it were a heavyweight title fight. Political strategists weren't debating policy, they were debating who would flinch first. Under the lights, in a glass-walled office high above K Street, Melania's PR war room was in full swing. A dozen aides huddled around a sleek conference table, laptops glowing with draft statements and curated photo galleries. The plan was simple: push images of Melania cradling children at charity events, slow-motion clips of her walking through hurricane shelters, quotes about grace under fire. The objective was to harden her image as America's elegant role model before Jasmine even stepped into the chamber. Anything less than perfection would be scrubbed, photoshopped, and buried. Every flaw erased except the ones Jasmine might bring to light. 3 miles away, in a much smaller, cluttered room in the Rayburn House office building, Jasmine's team operated on a different frequency. The air smelled of burnt coffee and urgency. Old file boxes were cracked open, contents spilling across the table, yellowed society pages from the early 2000s, obscure European tabloid clippings, flight logs that should have been sealed. Darren sat hunched over a faded Palm Beach newspaper, circling a grainy photo of Melania standing near Jeffrey Epstein at a gala, her smile faint but undeniable. Another aide scrolled through a dark corner forum, where an anonymous post claimed to have proof of a private introduction before she met Trump. No one spoke for long, just the rhythmic shuffle of paper, the click of keyboards, and the occasional sharp inhale when someone stumbled on a detail too dangerous to ignore. On a second monitor, a video flickered to life, shaky, handheld, low resolution, but unmistakable. A younger Melania stepping out of a black sedan in front of a mansion gate known to be one of Epstein's Florida estates. The timestamp was from a year the official narrative said she was living abroad. Jasmine leaned forward, elbows on the table, her eyes narrowing like a surgeon about to make the first incision. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. Every pixel of that footage was a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. The city outside kept humming traffic horns, news alerts pinging on phones, the winter wind cutting down Pennsylvania Avenue, but inside that cramped war room, the air was different, dense, heavy, charged. Somewhere between the coffee-stained newspapers and the grainy video, Jasmine could feel the story shifting under her feet. She wasn't just walking into a hearing anymore. She was walking into a vault of secrets that someone had spent decades and fortunes trying to keep sealed. And now, for the first time, the lock was trembling. What would happen when the door blew open, and the entire nation saw what was inside? The apartment was dark except for the pale light bleeding from Jasmine's phone screen as she paced the hardwood floor, barefoot, each step sharp against the silence. The notifications were endless: supporters calling her a warrior, trolls branding her a traitor, threats written in all caps and venom. She swiped through them like flipping the pages of a book she already knew the ending to, her jaw tightening with each hateful word, her chest warming at each note of encouragement. Every ping was another reminder that tomorrow, she wouldn't just be facing Melania Trump, she'd be standing before the entire country, every move dissected in real time. Her mind pulled her backward to a memory she rarely visited, her first run for office, a televised debate where an opponent had laughed at her credentials. She could still hear the condescension in his voice, see the smirk he wore when he told her, "You're not ready for the big leagues." That night, she'd stayed silent too long, and the loss had burned her like acid. She had promised herself never again would she walk into a room without a blade sharpened and ready. Across the city, in a penthouse suite shielded by tinted glass, Melania Trump sat at the head of a polished mahogany table. Her lawyer, a man with silver hair and a voice like a metronome, read her potential questions in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Melania repeated her answers, refining them until they flowed like water, smooth, measured, impossible to trip. Between rehearsals, makeup artists dabbed at her cheeks, stylists adjusted the drape of her silk blouse. On the table, a stack of glossy photos showed her hugging storm victims, smiling with veterans, laughing with children. Every image was designed to be armor, each word scripted to sound like grace under fire. Back in her apartment, Jasmine stopped pacing and set her phone on the counter. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small, unmarked USB drive, its silver casing cool against her palm. Inside it, video, photos, records, was everything she had uncovered, everything her team had pieced together in long, caffeine-fueled nights. It wasn't just evidence, it was a key, and once it turned in the lock of public opinion, no amount of PR polish could close that door again. She stood by the window, looking out over the city's glowing grid. Somewhere beyond the skyline, Melania was rehearsing her pose, polishing her smile. Somewhere, networks were adjusting their graphics, counting down the hours to broadcast. Jasmine exhaled slowly, the weight of the USB still in her hand, and let the thought settle in her bones. By this time tomorrow, one of them would walk away stronger than ever, and the other would never recover. The question wasn't just whose truth would America believe, it was whether America was ready to believe the truth at all. The hearing room didn't look like a chamber of democracy, it looked like a stage built for the kind of drama no script could contain. Marble columns rose like pillars of judgment, the ceiling arching high above in a sweep of gold and shadow. American flags flanked the long mahogany table at the center, their fabric still in the airless heat of television lights. Those lights were merciless, washing over every surface until there was nowhere to hide, not even in the corners. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, but underneath was something sharper, the metallic edge of anticipation. Every seat was taken. Rows of press in dark suits hunched over cameras that clicked like distant gunfire, each burst freezing a moment that could ruin a career. Senior aides clutched clipboards to their chests. Senators leaned back in their chairs like royalty waiting for the duel to begin. And in the gallery above, citizens craned their necks for a better view of history about to turn. The microphones sat on their stands like cold vipers, ready to catch every breath, every slip, every tremor in the voice. Two doors at opposite ends of the room swung open almost in unison. From the left, Jasmine Crockett stepped in, head high, her black suit cutting a razor-sharp silhouette against the light. From the right, Melania Trump glided forward in cream silk, every movement calculated, the quiet click of her heels echoing off marble. For a single, unbroken second, their eyes locked across the chamber. No smile, no nod, just a stillness that made the room feel smaller, tighter, like the air itself had pulled back to watch. The press went into overdrive, zoom lenses lunged forward, anchors whispered hot takes into live mix, and somewhere a producer mouthed "We've got it." On Twitter, the first still frame of their stare-down was already trending before they even reached their seats. Melania's expression was porcelain, perfectly smooth, perfectly unreadable. Jasmine's was steel, unbent, unblinking, daring the First Lady to make the first move. The chair cleared his throat, but it barely registered. The real trial wasn't going to happen in procedural language or on paper. It was happening right now, in the weight of that silent exchange, in the understanding that both women had arrived carrying more than speeches. Melania had her image, her polish, her army of handlers watching from the sidelines. Jasmine had her evidence, a single USB drive that might set fire to that image before the night was over. In the upper gallery, a man in a gray coat leaned forward, his face half hidden, eyes fixed on Jasmine. She noticed him but didn't react, not yet. Too many eyes were watching, and every gesture meant something here. This wasn't just a room in the Capitol, it was a crucible. And in this crucible, reputations weren't gently made or quietly, and none they were forged in flame or shattered like glass. In this room, reputation could be built or buried alive. The chair barely finished introducing the proceedings before Melania Trump leaned toward her microphone, the polished gold band around it glinting in the TV lights. Her voice was low, smooth, and accented just enough to feel deliberate, each syllable rolling out like it had been rehearsed for weeks. "I am here," she began, "to speak about the importance of dignity, responsibility, and experience. Qualities not everyone at this table has had the privilege or discipline to learn." The words floated in the air for half a heartbeat before the meaning landed. Unqualified, undisciplined, every camera in the room tilted toward Jasmine, hunting for a reaction. Melania kept going, her eyes occasionally sweeping the chamber, but never lingering on her opponent. In times of division, the American people need leaders who build bridges, not those who burn them for the sake of applause. The insult was wrapped in silk, but the edge of the blade gleamed. The insult was wrapped in silk, but the edge of the blade gleamed. A few senators shifted in their seats, aides scribbled notes they would later leak. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter's muffled laugh was picked up by a hot mic. The split in the room was instant and audible. From the right side of the chamber came the faint sound of approval, soft claps, murmurs of agreement. From the left came sharp inhales and the scrape of pens on notepads, as if they were documenting an unspoken rule being shattered. The atmosphere thickened, the way it does when everyone knows a storm is forming but no one moves to close the windows. On the internet, the reaction was even faster. Screens across America lit up with dueling hashtags, #MELANA Grace versus #Jasmine Strong. One camp called Melania a masterclass in class, praising her pose. The other accused her of cowardice for hiding behind subtle jabs instead of facing her opponent head-on. The algorithms didn't care, it was already trending worldwide, feeds exploding with clips of Melania's words on loop. Jasmine sat still, pen in hand, her expression carved from stone. She didn't look rattled, but the stillness itself was dangerous. It was the kind that came before the first crack of thunder. Her eyes stayed locked on Melania, not with open hostility, but with the measured focus of someone mapping every word for later use. Melania, sensing she had the room's attention, leaned back slightly, as if her work was done for now. The chair nodded for the statements to continue, but the air hadn't cleared. It had condensed into something almost physical. Journalists in the front row exchanged glances. If Jasmine fired back too soon, the story would be about her temper. If she waited too long, it would be about her silence. Every second of restraint was a gamble. Melania had drawn first blood without raising her voice, without breaking her smile. Now all eyes shifted to Jasmine, waiting to see if she would rise to the bait or let it rot on the table until the perfect moment. In politics, timing was everything, and this was the kind of opening that could crown a victor, or set the trap that swallows them whole. Would Jasmine take the bait or make Melania wish she'd never cast it in the first place? Jasmine leaned into her microphone slowly, letting the paws hang in the air long enough for every camera to tighten its frame on her face. Her voice, when it came, was steady, low, and deliberate, not a counterpunch, but the slow turning of a key in a lock. "Madam First Lady, I respect the institution you represent. But dignity," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, "is not a costume we put on for the cameras. It's the choices we make when no one is watching, and the consequences we're willing to face when the truth finds its way to the light." A few pens froze mid-scratch. The press gallery shifted forward, anticipating where she might be going. She didn't take the bait Melania had dangled, at least not yet. Instead, she framed her response in the language of moral responsibility, layering her words with references to the communities she served, the promises she'd made, the accountability she believed the American people deserved. It was a calculated move, one that kept her above the personal insult while planting the seed that something far bigger was coming. Every sentence sounded like a prelude, a faint drumbeat in the distance that could grow into a war march at any moment. Inside, though, her thoughts were anything but calm. She could feel the weight of the USB drive in her blazer pocket, pressing against her side like a live round waiting to be chambered. The images, the videos, the timestamps, they were all there, ready to tear through the carefully manufactured facade sitting across from her. But the timing had to be perfect, too early, and the impact would scatter. Too late, and the moment would slip through her fingers. She had to let the room believe in its own balance for just a little longer, before flipping the table entirely. She glanced briefly at Melania, catching the faintest flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, the look of someone who believed she'd landed the first and last word. That was fine. Let her think she'd won this round. Let her relax just enough to forget that storms don't announce themselves, they gather in silence, then strike without warning. In the gallery, the man in the gray coat was still watching her, his expression unreadable, his hand resting on the rail as if waiting for a signal only he would recognize. She made no move, but his presence etched itself into her awareness. Pieces were aligning. The chamber was still, but the current running beneath it was volatile, ready to erupt. Jasmine finished her statement with a calm that felt almost unnatural in the heat of the moment. The truth doesn't belong to one side or one person, it belongs to the people, and it always finds its way. Then she leaned back, her hands folded, as if she had said all she needed to say. But in her mind, she was counting down 3, 2, 1, knowing that when her calm broke, it wouldn't be a ripple. It would be a hurricane that left nothing standing. What happens when the calm turns into a hurricane, and you're sitting directly in its path? Jasmine leaned forward, her elbows resting lightly on the polished mahogany, fingers interlaced like she was holding back the weight of something lethal. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but each word carried the precision of a scalpel. "Madam First Lady, you've spoken today about family values, about being a symbol for America's moral compass. But a symbol," she paused, letting the microphones catch the silence, "is only as strong as the truth that holds it up." A ripple moved through the chamber, soft gasps, the shuffle of papers, the instinctive shift of cameras toward Melania's face. Melania tilted her head slightly, the practiced gesture of someone accustomed to scrutiny, but her eyes narrowed a fraction, the faintest crack in her porcelain mask. Jasmine's voice dropped half a tone, the way a warning lowers before it strikes. "And I can't help but wonder," she continued, "if the version of your past America has been shown. Is the whole story, or if there's a chapter the nation hasn't been allowed to read." A sharp click echoed in the chamber, not from a microphone, but from a camera zooming in tight, its lens drinking in the twitch of Melania's jaw. On the big screen, in the media room down the hall, that jawline was now 10 feet tall, magnified for every network analyst to dissect in slow motion before the next commercial break. The air inside the hearing room grew denser, as if every breath was being measured for what it might reveal. Melania shifted in her seat, crossing one leg over the other, her hands smoothing the fabric of her skirt in movements too precise to be casual. "Mrs. Crockett," she began, her smile sharp at the edges, "America knows my story. They know where I came from. They know who I am." Jasmine didn't look away. "Do they?" she asked softly, so softly that the question felt more dangerous. "Or do they know the story someone wanted them to believe?" A murmur rippled through the audience, caught in snatches by hot mix. "What's she talking about? Is this about Palm Beach? God, she's going there." The chair's gavel tapped once for order, but the sound was swallowed by the tension that now coiled between the two women. Jasmine kept her gaze steady, her expression unreadable except for the glint in her eyes, the kind of glint that told seasoned reporters they were seconds away from something explosive. In her mind, Jasmine was cataloging every micro-expression, the tightening at the corner of Melania's lips, the shallow breath she tried to hide, the way her left hand lingered a beat too long over the edge of her notepad. All signs of a defense already bending under pressure, but she didn't press harder yet. Instead, she leaned back just enough to suggest control, letting the words she had already dropped seep like ink into the room's consciousness. This was the first crack in the dam. It wouldn't burst now, not yet. But when it did, the flood wouldn't just wash away the image of a beacon of family values, it would drown it. Would Melania hold her ground, or would that first tremor be the one that made the whole facade crumble? Jasmine let the silence stretch, the kind that pulls every ear forward, then spoke with surgical precision. "And yet," she said, her voice steady but carrying the edge of glass about to break, "there are birth records that suggest the First Lady's family values began with a family America has never been told about." The words landed like a detonation. A low, collective gasp swelled from the press gallery, camera shutters firing in rapid bursts as if trying to capture every flicker of reaction before it vanished. The back row of reporters leaned forward in unison, pens suspended over notepads. Jasmine didn't flinch. "A child," she continued, "born before the marriage, fathered by a man who is not the President of the United States." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The restraint in her delivery made it more dangerous, as though she were simply stating a fact she could prove. Across the room, the color drained from Melania's cheeks in a slow fade that no makeup could mask. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together in a thin, controlled line. For the first time that afternoon, her eyes darted not toward Jasmine, but toward her lawyer seated just behind her. It was a glance that lasted no more than a second, but the cameras caught it from 3 angles. Somewhere in the control room at Fox News, a producer barked an order, and the feed cut abruptly to commercial and insurance move to avoid airing whatever might come next without legal vetting. Melania leaned forward, her voice sharper now, the accent no longer a soft veil but a sharpened edge. "This is a lie, a disgusting, fabricated lie." Her fingers gripped a microphone stand, knuckles whitening, as if trying to crush the steel. The denial was forceful, but it came too quickly, and seasoned political reporters knew that sometimes speed was a tell. The chair rapped the gavel once for order, but the air in the chamber was electric, snapping with the kind of tension that turns hearings into front-page history. Jasmine sat motionless, letting the denial hang in the space between them, her gaze locked not on Melania's eyes, but on the faint pulse beating at the side of her neck. It was too fast for someone confident in their innocence. Whispers rippled through the gallery. A CNN correspondent mouthed holy hell into their phone. An MSNBC anchor's voice cracked mid-sentence as they tried to narrate the shift in the room. Outside the Capitol, protesters on both sides began chanting louder, as if they could feel the seismic tremor even without hearing the words directly. Jasmine finally spoke, low enough that the microphones had to lean in for her. "If it's a lie, then there's nothing to fear. But," she let the pause cut like a blade, "if it's the truth, then you already know why you're afraid." She leaned back, folding her hands, her eyes never leaving Melania's face. In that stare was the promise that the next revelation would go deeper, cut sharper, and leave no room for denial. If it was a lie, why did the First Lady look like she'd just seen the walls close in? Outside the Capitol, the moment Jasmine uttered the words "a child, not fathered by the president" was already ricocheting across the country. In Times Square, The giant jumbotrons that normally pulsed with sports scores and perfume ads flickered to a live C-SPAN feed, freezing on Melania's pale, tight-lipped reaction. Crowds gathered instinctively, tourists holding phones above their heads, cab drivers pausing mid-shift, a street vendor forgetting to hand over a hot dog as his eyes locked on the screen. Some stared with mouths open, others whispered furiously to strangers, piecing together their own versions of the story in real time. In a sports bar in Detroit, every TV that had been showing NFL highlights was switched to the hearing. Dear glasses clinked on tables, not in celebration, but in disbelief. A man in a faded army jacket muttered, "No way she just said that," while a woman across from him tapped her phone at rapid speed, tweeting the quote verbatim before it vanished into the nose. On the East Coast, in a cramped Queens apartment, an elderly couple leaned in toward a flickering flat screen, shaking their heads, not in denial, but in recognition, like people who'd seen powerful families bury secrets before. TikTok lit up within seconds, clips from the live feed chopped down to 15-second bursts. One showed Jasmine leaning into the mic, the audio slowed to make the words heavier, almost cinematic. Another zoomed on Melania's eyes as she glanced toward her lawyer, paired with captions like "That's not a poker face, that's panic." By the time the hearing moved on, hashtags like #FirstLadyScandal and #JasmineDrop were pulling millions of views, fueled by endless speculation threads. Some were forensic, comparing old photographs, travel dates, even background figures in party shots from Palm Beach. Others were blunt, with captions that simply read, "She's done." Cable news scrambled to keep up. MSNBC ran a chyron that asked, "Bombshell or smear?" CNN's panel split instantly, half warning against unverified claims, the other half pointing to Jasmine's confidence as a sign she had receipts. Fox News came back from its abrupt commercial break with a noticeably more polished segment, cutting away from the exact moment Jasmine dropped the hint, replaying only Melania's denial. But by then, it didn't matter, the raw moment was already immortalized online, reposted, remixed, slowed down, dissected frame by frame. Back in the hearing room, the hum of digital chaos outside began to seep in through the aides checking their phones, the journalists whispering to each other between questions, the senators glancing nervously at their staff. Even the chair's gavel strikes couldn't restore the sense of order. The chamber itself had become just one stage. The real trial was unfolding on millions of screens, in living rooms and subway cars, in coffee shops and college dorms. And in that sprawling, uncontrollable arena, guilt or innocence didn't matter as much as perception. The evidence might not yet be on the table, but the verdict in the hearts of the public was already forming. The court of public opinion had just been called into session, and once the court convened, there was no telling whose sentence would be final. Jasmine didn't speak at first. She simply reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out a small silver USB drive, the kind that looked harmless enough to hold school essays or vacation photos. But in this room, under these lights, it was a live round. She held it between two fingers for just long enough to let the cameras catch it, then rose from her seat without asking for permission. Her heels clicked against the marble as she crossed to the console at the center of the chamber, a sound that seemed to echo louder than any gavel strike. Melania's eyes followed the movement, but her posture didn't break. Still, her right hand shifted under the table, fingertips pressing against the wood in a slow, tightening grip. The chair leaned forward, his voice hesitant. "Congresswoman Crockett, is this material pertinent to its evidence?" Jasmine cut in, her tone steady but with an undercurrent that could slice steel. "And the American people deserve to see it." The drive slid into the console with a quiet click that sounded deafening in the silence. A black screen blinked once on the chamber's main display, then flickered to life in grainy, handheld footage. The image was shaky, the lighting dim, but the outline of the mansion was unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen the photographs. Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach estate. The camera panned past the wrought iron gates, through a corridor lined with portraits, before stopping on a group of guests clustered around a marble bar. And there she was, Melania, younger but unmistakable, her laughter caught mid-frame, a champagne flute in hand. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint whir of the projector fan, and somewhere, the shutter of a camera firing in slow, deliberate clicks. On screen, a man, Epstein himself, moved into frame, leaning close to Melania as if whispering something. Her hand touched his arm in a way that could have been casual. But in this context, looked like familiarity. In the second row, a senator's pen froze above his notepad. In the press gallery, a reporter mouthed, "Oh my God," before catching themselves, their voice still picked up by a hot mic. Fox News producers, watching from their control room, scrambled over each other, one shouting to pull the feed, another arguing they couldn't without looking complicit. CNN cut to a split screen, showing both the footage and Melania's live reaction, her lips pressed into a thin white line, eyes fixed forward, jaw tightening with each passing second of the clip. The video ended abruptly, the screen going black, but the silence lingered like smoke after a gunshot. No one moved. Jasmine stood at the console, her hands resting lightly on the edge, as if she'd just placed a single chess piece that changed the entire board. She didn't look at Melania, not yet. The power wasn't in the confrontation, it was in the stillness that came after, in letting the image burn itself into the minds of everyone watching, both here and across the country. The chair cleared his throat but found no words. The chamber felt smaller now, the air heavier, the walls closer. And in that suffocating quiet, one question rose like a shadow that would not leave. How deep did this go? And what would they find if they kept digging? The screen behind Jasmine faded to black, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the image itself. She didn't let it settle. From the side of the console, she retrieved a slim, black leather folder and carried it back to her seat with deliberate, unhurried steps. When she sat, she slid out a stack of papers and placed them neatly in front of her, the white of the printed pages almost glaring under the lights. "These," she said, her voice low but carrying across the chamber, "are not rumors, they're not speculation. They're direct communications between the First Lady of the United States and Jeffrey Epstein." She lifted the first page, holding it so the television cameras could zoom in. A date was visible, 2002, and beneath it, the words in black ink, "Looking forward to the introduction you mentioned. We'll keep arrangements discreet." Jasmine let the page hang there for a beat, giving the room time to absorb each word. Across the table, Melania's lawyer shot forward in his chair. "Mr. Chairman," he said sharply, "we must object to the introduction of these documents. They are hearsay at best, and likely inadmissible under any standard of evidence." The interruption was crisp, rehearsed, but there was a hairline crack in his voice, a faint tremor that betrayed urgency. Jasmine didn't look at him. "These are verified copies, obtained through legal channels, and cross-referenced with server metadata. The chain of custody is intact." She flipped to another page. This one read, "We'll need to confirm the ages. Prefer introductions in private, arrangements as discussed." Melania's lawyer stood, this time almost knocking his chair back. "This is outrageous. This entire line of questioning is a political stunt. I demand the chair strike this from the record immediately." His voice bounced off the marble, his anger calculated for the cameras, but his eyes kept darting to the papers in Jasmine's hands as if each page was a fuse waiting to be lit. The chair, who until now had been shifting uncomfortably in his seat, finally leaned toward his microphone. "Request denied," he said. The words deliberate, slow. A few murmurs escaped from the audience, aides exchanged quick looks. The denial meant the documents would remain in the record, televised, analyzed, and immortalized in the annals of public record. Jasmine laid the second page flat on the table, tapping her index finger against the phrase "introductions in private" without saying another word. The press gallery erupted in the staccato of rapid-fire shutters. Melania sat motionless, her expression frozen into something between disdain and calculation, but the tightening of her jaw and the subtle shift in her breathing betrayed that the strike had landed. Jasmine's eyes swept the chamber, then returned to the papers in front of her. "These emails," she said evenly, "tell a story very different from the one America has been sold." She let her gaze fall on Melania for the first time since the evidence began. "And when that story is fully told, the question won't be whether the First Lady can defend herself. It will be whether there's anything left to defend. Could the First Lady's defense survive this when the truth had already taken root in the court of public opinion?" For a moment, Melania sat perfectly still, the papers and the grainy footage still hanging in the air like a thick fog. Then her hand twitched just once before she gripped a microphone and leaned in, her voice emerging softer than expected, almost trembling. "These are disgusting lies," she said, the accent heavier now, her breath uneven. "Lies from a woman who has nothing but jealousy and hatred in her heart." The last word caught in her throat, cracking slightly, and that tiny fracture made the entire room lean closer. She pressed on, faster now, as if momentum could drown out the tremor in her tone. "You are not here for truth, Miss Crockett. You are here for attention for your 15 minutes, for your little performance." Her eyes narrowed, the mask of diplomatic restraint falling away in pieces. "You stand there pretending to have morals, but you are nothing compared to me." The words landed sharp, but there was a desperation under them, the kind that can't be staged. Two aides in dark suits moved toward her from behind, one placing a hand lightly on her shoulder, the other bending down to murmur something only she could hear. She shook her head once, sharply, her free hand batting them away without looking at them. A glass of water was set on the table near her elbow. She didn't even glance at it. Her knuckles whitened around the microphone, as the letting go would mean surrender. Jasmine didn't flinch, she didn't speak. She just watched calm, unblinking as Melania's voice rose another notch. "You bring shame to this chamber, to the people you say you represent. You call yourself a fighter for justice? No, you are a vulture, feeding on rumors, feeding on lies." The rhythm of her speech faltered, the consonants striking harder, betraying a quickening heartbeat. In the gallery, phones capture every second. Streams already pushing to TikTok with captions like "she's losing it," and Melania snaps on live TV. A reporter in the front row scribbled in the margin of his notes, "Loss of control equals story shift." The chair's gavel came down once for order, and even he seemed reluctant to cut the moment short, knowing history was being written in real time. Melania's lawyer finally stepped closer, hand on the back of her chair, murmuring insistently, but she kept her grip on the mic, eyes locked on Jasmine with a glare that was part fury, part plea. The tension was almost physical now, every breath, every glance, every twitch amplified by the charged air between them. When she finally released the microphone, it wasn't in defeat, but in exhaustion, her shoulders rising and falling as if the weight of the room had pressed down on her all at once. She leaned back, exhaling through her nose, eyes darting briefly toward the exit before snapping back to Jasmine. It was clear to everyone watching, both in the chamber and across the nation's screen, something had cracked. And when pride meets truth, only one can walk away unbroken. The question now was which one. The chamber had barely recovered from Melania's outburst when a slow creak of movement drew every eye to the back row. A man in a gray coat, the same one who had been silent in the gallery since the start, rose to his feet. His face was weathered, lined not just with age but with the kind of wear that comes from knowing too much for too long. He removed his coat in a single, deliberate motion, revealing a dark suit and a congressional-issued witness badge clipped to his breast pocket. The whisper that swept through the room was immediate. Someone on the inside had been waiting for this moment. The chair leaned forward. "Sir, please state your name for the record." The man's voice was deep but roughened at the edges, like gravel dragged across concrete. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I was employed as household staff at the Palm Beach residence of Jeffrey Epstein from 1998 until 2003. A ripple of unease passed through the gallery. The name alone carried weight, and in this room, it was a live wire. Jasmine didn't move, but her eyes narrowed just slightly, the recognition flashing across her face for less than a second. Mercer stepped toward the center aisle, hands clasped in front of him. "I am here under oath," he said, looking directly at the chair, "to state that I personally introduced Melania Naus to Jeffrey Epstein. This was in Palm Beach, in the summer of 2001, over a year before she met Donald Trump." The sentence hit like a shockwave. Gasps rippled through the chamber, the sound oddly synchronized, as if the room itself had inhaled. The press gallery erupted into a frenzy of camera shutters, lenses swiveling toward Melania, whose face had gone utterly still. She didn't blink, she didn't speak, only her right hand, resting on the table, betrayed her with a subtle tremor. Mercer continued, his voice steady, almost clinical. "It was at a private gathering attended by fewer than 20 guests. My role was to coordinate introductions for Mr. Epstein with individuals he specified in advance. Melania Naus was one of them. The meeting was not accidental." He paused, scanning the faces before him, letting the statement settle like dust after an explosion. Melania's lawyer sprang to his feet. "This is hearsay. This man has no documentation." "No." Mercer cut him off without raising his voice. "I have the guest list, signed by the hosts, and my own employment records confirming I was on duty that evening." The lawyer froze, mid-step, as the chair rapped his gavel once for order. In the back of the room, a young reporter whispered into her phone, "This is it. This is the story." On Twitter, the hashtag Epstein link began climbing like wildfire. Mercer's gaze moved, finally, to Jasmine. "You have the rest," he said quietly, almost as if it were a handoff in plain sight. Jasmine inclined her head by a fraction, the smallest acknowledgement between two people who understood the stakes. Every person in that chamber felt it, the sharp click of another lock breaking on a vault that was never meant to be opened. And the question coiled in the air like a viper ready to strike: was this the final nail in the coffin, or just the first strike of the hammer? Daniel Mercer adjusted the microphone, his hand steady despite the weight of the room pressing in on him. "In the months after that first meeting," he began, "I was present during several conversations between Mr. Epstein and Ms. Naus." He paused, glancing briefly at Melania, whose gaze was fixed straight ahead, her face carved into stillness. "These conversations were not about charity events or public appearances," Mercer continued. "They were about avoiding certain reporters and keeping certain people quiet." A stir rippled through the press gallery, chairs creaking as journalists leaned forward in unison. One reporter's pen scratched across paper at breakneck speed. Another already had their phone out, thumbs flying to get the quote online before anyone else. The tension in the chamber sharpened, pulling everyone closer to the edge of their seats. Mercer's voice took on a colder tone, as if replaying the scenes in his head as he spoke. "On one occasion, I brought refreshments to a private lounge off the main hall. I stopped just inside the doorway when I heard Mr. Epstein say, 'No photographs from that night.' 'None. I'll handle the payments personally,' Ms. Naus responded. 'I understand. Discretion is the most important thing.'" He looked up, scanning the room. It wasn't the words alone, it was the way they were said. As if this was not the first time they'd had such a conversation. Melania's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, scribbling notes, then passed a folded paper to her under the table. She didn't unfold it. Her hands remained still, fingers laced tightly together, knuckles pale. The only movement was the faint rhythm of her breathing slower now, as if controlling it was the only thing she could still control. Mercer continued, "In another instance, I overheard a discussion about what they called introductions overseas. Mr. Epstein said the arrangements had to be off the books and immune to the American press. Ms. Naus agreed, adding, 'We don't want any surprises.'" He let the words hang there, knowing their weight would carry farther than anything else he could say. Jasmine sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table before her, eyes locked on Mercer. Her face betrayed nothing, no nods, no smirks, no flicker of triumph. The restraint was deliberate. She knew the cameras were waiting for any sign of satisfaction. Silence, in this moment, was her sharpest weapon. The absence of reaction allowed the testimony to stand alone, undiluted, impossible to dismiss as performance. The chamber itself seemed to constrict, the air denser with every passing second. Somewhere in the gallery, a low murmur rose and then died as quickly as it began. The chair shifted in his seat, his gavel resting loosely in his hand, as if even he knew the room didn't need prompting to maintain order, it needed space to breathe under the weight of what had just been said. And there it was, two exchanges, pulled from the shadows into the blinding light of a televised hearing. They weren't just allegations anymore, they were details, dates, and quotes from a man who had stood in the room when they happened. Could anyone spin this now, when the silence in the chamber spoke louder than any defense ever could? By the time Mercer stepped down from the witness table, the air inside the Capitol was charged enough to feel dangerous. But outside, the storm had already broken. The moment his testimony hit the news wires, the west steps of the Capitol became a magnet for chaos. Reporters swarmed to barricades in a frenzy of camera flashes and shouted questions, microphones thrust forward like weapons. The sound was a constant horseshoes pounding against stone, the click-click of shutters, the ragged calls of journalists trying to be the first to grab a quote. Network vans lined the street shoulder to shoulder, satellite dishes aimed skyward, each vying for the cleanest feed. Producers barked into headsets, sending correspondents live every 5 minutes, their voices pitched high with urgency. "We are hearing unconfirmed reports of printed emails linking the First Lady directly to Epstein," one anchor breathlessly announced over a split screen of the protests now spilling into the Capitol lawn. The crowd wasn't uniform. On one side, anti-Trump activists waved placards reading "No one above the law" and "First Lady," First liar, their chants rising like a drumbeat under the winter sky. On the other, staunch supporters clutched signs with Melania's face framed in gold, shouting that the hearing was a witch hunt, a smear campaign orchestrated by radical Democrats. Between them, police officers formed a thin line, their hands resting on batons, eyes scanning for the first sign that shouting would turn to shoving. Inside a coffee shop across the street, the television above the counter blared the live coverage. Customers abandoned their drinks to huddle around the screen, some muttering "I knew it," others shaking their heads, muttering about politics gone too far. One young woman, still in her coat, was already live streaming to TikTok, narrating every update from her phone. She didn't even deny outright, she told her viewers, the comments pouring in faster than she could read. On the line, the hashtags had splintered into war zones. Hashtag Melania Exposed was trending at number 1, closely followed by hashtag Jasmine the Hammer and hashtag Epstein link. Twitter threads ran miles long, armchair investigators posting side-by-side images, old event flyers, flight manifests, trying to piece together a timeline that mainstream news hadn't yet confirmed. YouTube reaction channels live instantly, their hosts speaking over replays of Melania's tightening jaw and Mercer's matter-of-fact delivery. The Capitol Police radios crackled with chatter as reinforcements were called in to manage the swelling crowd. From the building's upper windows, aides peeked out to see the scene, their faces pale. They knew what was unfolding was no longer just a hearing, it was a public reckoning. The chants outside grew louder, overlapping into an indistinguishable roar. Inside, in the hearing chamber, everyone could feel it. Whatever verdict the official process would deliver, the streets were already deciding their own. And once the public decided, no carefully worded statement or polished press conference could unmake it. The only question left was the most dangerous one of all: would the public forgive, or would they revolt? The chair's voice cracked through the suffocating silence. "Mrs. Trump, would you like to respond to the witness?" But Melania didn't lean toward the microphone this time, she didn't even look at him. Instead, her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently into her ear. For a moment, she kept her gaze locked on the table in front of her, as if weighing whether standing up would be an admission of defeat or the only way to survive the day. Finally, she spoke, her tone clipped and brittle. "Mr. Chairman, I request to be excused." The room stilled. Even the reporters stopped typing. This wasn't a recess, this wasn't a procedural break. It was a retreat, and everyone knew it. The chair hesitated just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle on every camera lens trained on her. "The request is granted," he said reluctantly, each syllable sounding like it had been dragged over gravel. Melania stood, slowly at first, then more decisively, her chair sliding back against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to loud in the chamber's stillness. Her lawyer moved to her side, shielding her from the closest photographers, but the room erupted anyway, flashes firing in rapid, relentless bursts. Aides scrambled to flank her, forming a loose human wall, but there was no way to shield her completely from the strobing light and the dozens of eyes tracking her every movement. She kept her chin high, but her posture was tighter now, her shoulders drawn in. Each step toward the double door seemed to pull the air out of the room. Behind her, the chair's gavel struck for order, but the noise was swallowed by the barrage of shudders and shouted questions. "Mrs. Trump, did you know Epstein personally? Is there a child? Do you deny the emails?" None of them were answered. The moment she crossed the threshold into the hallway, the sound doubled. The corridor outside was a gauntlet of press and protesters, their voices crashing together into an indistinguishable roar. Security agents pushed forward, parting the crowd just enough for her to pass. Flashbulbs painted her in blinding pulses, one frame after another capturing her tight jaw, her downcast eyes, the tension in her grip on the lawyer's arm. She didn't slow, didn't break stride, but she also didn't look back. Outside, the winter wind hit hard, catching at her hair and scarf as she descended the Capitol steps. Below, the crowd surged forward against the barricades, chanting, jeering, snapping photos on their phones. Her motorcade waited at the curb, black SUVs idling, doors open. She slid into the back seat without a word, the door slamming shut with a finality that felt almost ceremonial. The cameras kept firing long after the convoy pulled away, the flashes chasing taillights into the gray afternoon. Inside the hearing chamber, the seat she had vacated sat empty under the glare of the lights, the microphone still angled toward where her voice had been. And in every newsroom, every bar, every living room across America, the same question began to take root, a question with the power to end a career, a reputation, maybe even a legacy. Was this the end of her public life, or just the moment it truly began to unravel? When the echo of Melania's departure finally faded, the chamber felt strangely hollow, like a theater after the lead actor has walked off mid-performance. All eyes turned to Jasmine, but she didn't rush to fill the silence. She sat with her hands folded, letting the emptiness breathe for a moment, knowing the weight of the next words would define not just this hearing, but the narrative that would follow her long after the camera shut off. She rose slowly, adjusting the microphone until her voice carried evenly across the marble walls. Mr. Chairman, members of this chamber, and to every American watching, what we've seen today isn't just about one person's past, it's about a system. A system that protects the powerful, polishes their images, and buries the truth so deep the rest of us are told it never existed. Her tone was measured, but there was iron under every syllable. She glanced toward the press gallery, making sure her words landed where they would be replayed, clipped, and quoted. For decades, minority communities in this country have been told to wait for justice, to wait for the truth. We've been told that the rules will apply to everyone, only to watch those rules bend like glass when they meet the weight of privilege. The evidence we brought forward today isn't just evidence against one individual, it's evidence against the double standard baked into the very bones of our politics. A murmur rippled through the audience, but Jasmine pressed on, her voice gaining force. When a black mother lies awake at night, wondering if her child will make it home safely from a traffic stop, no one spares her from the consequences of suspicion. When a working-class immigrant misfiles a form, there is no press conference to soften the blow, no army of lawyers to make it disappear. But when the rich and connected find themselves tangled in scandal, the narrative shifts. Suddenly, it's all a misunderstanding. Suddenly, the truth is negotiable. Her gaze swept the senators in front of her, lingering just long enough to make a few of them look away. I am not here to negotiate the truth. I am here to put it on the record so that the American people can see it, hear it, and decide for themselves. We cannot afford a democracy where the truth is optional. We cannot afford leaders who believe the rules are written in pencil for themselves and in permanent ink for everyone else. She straightened, letting the silence build again, every breath in the chamber audible. Accountability is not partisan. Truth is not partisan. And if that makes some of you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourselves why. Her hands fell to her sides as she took her seat again, but the words lingered like heat after a flame. In the press gallery, fingers flew across keyboards. On the streets outside, the chants grew louder. Whether or not the hearing had reached its legal conclusion, Jasmine knew the verdict would live far beyond these walls. The only question now was simple: would her words echo beyond the chamber, or would they be buried like so many truths before? In the West Wing, the walls themselves seemed to hum with panic. Advisors clustered in tight circles, voices sharp and low, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee and adrenaline. The TV in the Roosevelt Room played the hearing on loop, each damning moment replay, until it felt like a drumbeat no one could stop. On screen, Melania's walkout ran side by side with Mercer's testimony, and every replay made the advisors' faces tighten further. Kill the feed, one aide snapped, but no one moved. The problem wasn't the television. The problem was that the clip had already gone viral, playing on a million screens they couldn't shut off. We need a statement out in 15 minutes, another insisted, slamming a folder onto the table. Something measured, non-committal, don't even say her name if we can help it. Trump's communications director paced like a caged animal. The press corps is already asking if this means she's stepping back from public appearances. They're tying her to Epstein in headlines, even the conservative outlets. We don't have 24 hours, we have 24 minutes. The president wasn't in the room, but his presence was everywhere, in the clipped urgency of his staff, in the fear that one misstep could trigger a furious call none of them wanted to answer. In the corner, a young aide pulled up a draft statement on her laptop. It read like it had been stitched together from safe cliches. The First Lady remains committed to serving the American people and will not be distracted by baseless accusations. The words were bland, bloodless, designed to hold space without giving an inch. It's not enough, someone muttered, but no one offered anything better. The truth was, There was no good version, only damage control that might slow the bleeding. When the statement finally went out, it was swallowed instantly by the nose outside. Cable news hosts read it aloud with raised eyebrows, already dissecting what it didn't say. Social media mocked it. Screenshots of the text paired with captions like "That's it," and "Blink twice if you need help." Late-night comedians were already lining up punchlines before the ink was metaphorically dry. In the Situation Room, an advisor turned away from the wall of monitors. "We can't contain this," he admitted. "The footage, the emails, the witness, it's not going away. This isn't just about her anymore. This is about us." The room went still. Everyone knew what us meant. If the scandal's shadow grew any longer, it wouldn't just darken the First Lady's reputation, it would swallow the president's, and by extension, the administration's fragile grip on the narrative. Phones buzzed with incoming polls showing a dip in approval ratings, not catastrophic yet, but sharper than anything they'd seen in months. The noise outside the White House gates was growing. 2 journalists shouting questions, protesters setting up camp, camera crews staking their spots for the morning shows. In the West Wing, no one said it out loud, but the thought hung in the air like the scent before a storm. This wasn't just a PR crisis, it was the first crack in the facade. And the question everyone was too afraid to voice was the one echoing in every newsroom and kitchen table across the country: could the presidency survive the shadow now looming over it? Morning broke over Washington with the cold clarity of a hangover. Every network opened with the same lead story: the hearing, the walkout, the footage, the emails. Cable news split its screens into grids: Melania's frozen expression in one box, Mercer's calm testimony in another, Jasmine's unflinching gaze anchoring them all. Analysts picked apart every frame like forensic scientists, replaying her glance toward her lawyer, the tightening of her jaw, the tremor in her voice. On Good Morning America, a panel argued over whether this was a scandal of substance or optics, while CNN's poll tracker showed a jagged red line plunging faster than overnight trading in a market crash. Approval ratings for the administration had dropped 6 points in 12 hours, an unprecedented slide. Even Fox News, in a rare break, acknowledged the optics crisis and questioned the timing of Melania's retreat. In coffee shops from Los Angeles to Boston, screens glowed with the hearing replay. Strangers leaned over lattes to debate what it all meant, some speaking in anger, others in disbelief. Hashtags still dominated online. Hashtag MELANA exposed. Hashtag Jasmine strong. Hashtag truth in the chamber. TikTok swelled with quick cut montages, pairing the USB footage with dramatic music. Captions like "This is how it ends." Late-night hosts had already seized the moment, their monologues sharper than satire, playing Jasmine's final lines like a rallying cry. And in the quiet corners of power, whispers grew about damage control, about survival, about who might jump ship first. It wasn't just the First Lady's image on trial anymore, it was the credibility of the White House itself. Poll numbers could recover, narratives could be rewritten. But belief, once fractured, was almost impossible to mend. And the question that now hung over the nation was as dangerous as it was simple: what happens when the people no longer believe? The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after days of unrelenting noise. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, the lamp casting a pool of warm light over an open leather-bound journal. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her blazer draped over the back of a chair, sleeves still faintly scented with the adrenaline of yesterday. The pen in her hand hovered above the page before finally moving in deliberate strokes. Justice isn't a moment, it's a marathon. She underlined it once, the ink pooling slightly at the edges. The fatigue was there in the slump of her shoulders, in the faint bruised half-moons beneath her eyes, but so was something harder to define: resolve, the kind that survives even when the cameras are gone and the applause has faded. On the counter, her phone buzzed again and again. Reporters asking for follow-ups, supporters flooding her inbox, threats from faceless accounts that read like static in the background. She didn't reach for it, not yet. Her eyes drifted to the USB drive on the table, now sealed in an evidence envelope. In the hearing room, it had been a weapon. Here, in the soft light of home, it was a reminder of the weight she carried, of the people who would never get to walk into that chamber, of the stories that would never be told unless someone forced them into the light. She closed the journal, leaning back, letting the stillness press in. Outside, the city kept moving, sirens in the distance, the faint hum of traffic, but in here, time felt suspended. She knew the storm wasn't over. She knew the fight would come again, maybe sooner than she wanted. But she also knew this: yesterday, she had stood up. Tomorrow, someone else would have too. The only question now: who will stand up next? The screen fades to black for a beat. Then Jasmine's voice cuts through, low, steady, intimate, as if she's speaking directly to the viewer and no one else. The image returns in close-up, her eyes locked on the lens. No makeup touch-ups, no perfect lighting, just raw, unfiltered presence. The truth, she begins, doesn't come gift-wrapped. It doesn't arrive on a schedule. It doesn't wait for the moment when it's convenient or safe. It comes when it's ready, and it demands you decide right there what side you're on. Her gaze doesn't waver. Courage isn't standing up when the room is cheering for you. Courage is standing when you're alone, when the odds are stacked, when speaking means you might lose everything you've built. I've seen what happens when we stay silent. I've seen what happens when we let lies stand because it's easier than facing what's real. The camera tightens in, catching the faint quiver in her breath, not from fear, but from the weight of the words. Democracy doesn't collapse in a single day. It erodes when people stop defending it. It dies in the comfort of thinking someone else will fight for it, that someone else will speak up. But there is no someone else, there's only us. Her voice gains steel, each syllable deliberate. If you believe in a country where the powerful can be held to the same standard as the powerless, then your voice matters. If you believe the truth should never be negotiated, then your presence matters. And if you believe silence is complicity, then your action matters most of all. The frame holds her eyes as the words slow, deliberate, final. Because one day, the truth will come to your door. And when the truth knocks, will you open the door? The story reminds us that truth is rarely comfortable and almost never arrives at the right time, but it is always worth defending. Silence may feel safer, but it slowly erodes integrity, justice, and trust. Speaking up, even when your voice shakes, can shift the course of history, not just for yourself, but for those who can't speak for themselves. In our own lives, courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by what we choose to do despite it. When your moment comes to stand for what's right, will you take it or let it pass in silence? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.